Hi. The backstory in this episode is about my tenure in the People's Friendship University, Moscow, in 1986. And what I will do in this episode is I will do a walk back to the academic program I had designed right at Karyavattam to be carried out in the People's Friendship University once I reached there. Now, about the program. I was toward the last phase of the river metamorphosis project. And this project deals with aspects of environmental geology. And in environmental geology, the most important driving force is humans. And the humans are, outside of the natural forces, the most important drivers of environmental change, environmental transformation, if you want to say that way. Then, what I did, I had done a lot of work, I would say, and I wanted to look at the quartz grain micromorphometry using a scanning electron microscope. So, what I did, I had taken along at least 15 samples of 20 or 30 grains each from each sample from the mainstream of the Naya River. So that was packed and securely labeled, etc. Then another thing I had planned was to have a look at what is called the residue retained in the filter paper which was actually used in filtration of the water samples of Naya. We had a passive filtration unit built by Sartorius, which was purchased for our use in the laboratory. Well, of course, Sartorius is not an Indian company. It is what is called a West German manufacturer. Of course, we had a West German Sartorius brand, micro electronic balance also. Okay, that apart, that aside. Now, back to the story. I had taken at least 10 filter papers with the residue of the suspended load in the water samples collected immediately after the monsoon of 85. Well, when you check these residue retained in the filter paper, it is going to tell us something about the accelerated erosion versus the geologic erosion. And, for some reason, I had a fascination for the limestones, especially the Koilon limestone. I had worked right from immediately after my MSc days as an unpaid assistant to Professor K.K. Menon, who had taken me along to the field to collect samples of Koilon limestone, and Professor Menon had published a wonderful paper on the diagenetic pyrite of the Koilon limestone, age Bardigalian, etc., in the prestigious journal called Nature. Okay, that aside, I continued. Once I joined the Department of Geology, University of Kerala in 1968, March 18th, my interest in the checking out of the Koilon limestone. So this process went on, and finally, when I was in CES, I wrote a paper with Swapan Ghosh, my colleague then, on the glauconite pyrite assemblage of the Koilon limestones and its implications to the the positional environment or setting, etc., etc. Then I continued my interest in the glauconite, not only in the Koilon limestone. We wrote up a paper on the occurrence of glauconite in the Sea of Shangumugam with Dr. Terry Achado, and it was published in the what is called the Indian Journal of Marine Sciences. And then what happened was, after 10 years or so, a friend from NIO, he published on the same glauconite that we reported, and he refined this what is called the mineralogy and called it chamosite. Well, it did not make a huge difference between the the environmental importance, environmental formation. Anyway, so I had taken fragments of like 1 centimeter cube, let us say, fragments of several fragments, something like 20 or 25 pieces of Koilon limestone, and which was unweathered, of course, and so that I wanted to look at the primary porosity of the limestone, which is different from the secondary porosity. We are talking about secondary porosity when you are looking at what is called the reservoir capacity, or reservoir related, oil reservoir especially, behavior of the limestone formations, because almost a large number of larger oil fields are associated with the carbonate reservoir rock. And the oil companies, the leading top 5 oil companies in the world, have been giving away money to professors or researchers in the universities to look at the secondary porosity, how it formed, why it formed, and whether they are large enough to enable the accumulation and transmission of oil through the reservoir rock, and so on. So it's a very important area of study. However, our Koilon limestone was not a big limestone formation. It is only, at least at the exposures in Padapakara, it is only about a foot and a half only in thickness. So there is not much scope about or for the examination of what is called the secondary porosity. However, the primary porosity was very crucial in the sense that this is what leads to the development of secondary porosity. In other words, the primary porosity is the avenue for the development of secondary porosity. Percolation, dissolution, removal, and reprecipitation, etc., etc. Anyway, very interestingly, all the samples were in my suitcase that I carried to Moscow, and no one in the immigration or whatever security check bothered about opening these little packets, folded up into small piece of paper to check what they are. Well, probably because I am in the first place an Indian, and in the second place I am headed to Moscow only, and there is not much I can because the Moscow government would know more about India than Indians would know. That is the reason. So it was. I also not checked at the other end in the Moscow airport. Anyways, so once I reached on the third day or so in the People of Friendship University, I told my friend, Comrade Strode Kropchev, a professor there, and my immediate host, that I have brought some samples and I would want to see the samples under the scanning electron microscope. And Strode told me that it is not very difficult. They have a facility in this, what is called PFU building in Ordonikidze. within Moscow. Well, of course, everything is in Moscow only, where I was, attached to, because, like I said, there is a social sciences, humanities, and language block coming up somewhere else within the Moscow city. And then, Mr. Strode told me, or Kropotchev told me that, Dr. Vic, let us see this gentleman who is the technician operating this, in charge of the scanning electron micrography laboratory, say by Monday next week. I said, okay, fine. And then what I did, the next day I collected all the samples and the packets, packed them very carefully and took it over to the department, and kept it in my almirah, or whatever storage space I was allotted to. And beyond that, I did not have much work in the PFU, because even though I was prepared to deliver with the color slides, etc., 35 slides, 3 different talks, scientific talks, one on the coastal erosion, second on the river metamorphosis, and third on something related to the culture and society of Kerala and where we stood those days. So unfortunately, all these people who attend this particular building, all of them are well versed, not in English but only in Russian language. So my suggestion or my preparedness was not actually implementable, which I was told plainly by Kropotchev, Professor Kropotchev. Then of course I dropped that idea. Then what I did, I purchased 2 notebooks from the local bookstore, are related to, attached to a high school in this neighborhood. In other words, I used to walk around in the neighborhood, whether it is the neighborhood of the PFU or the neighborhood of the Ministry of Education's hotel. In either case, that gives an opportunity to know directly, face to face, what happens, what is going on. So this, I purchased a pen also, not 1 pen, 2 pens and 2 notebooks. They're very cheap actually. 2 notebooks are A4, larger than A4, modern A4, because A4 and that kind of terminology was not in the vocabulary of the Russian science. So anyway, on those days, not now. Then I came to my office, and what I did, I started writing about, planned writing about a book, or creating the manuscript for a book on environmental geoscience. What I did, I completed something like 11 or 12 chapters, and that is only the first draft. And everything was drawn from my memory, my knowledge base. There was no book I can consult which available in the library, because, the basic reason is it's a Russian university. So once it took about a month or more to complete that 11 chapters. And it was drawn out very well. That's what I thought. Then I had again plenty of leisure time. What I did, I started preparing, doing the chapterization, and then preparing a laboratory manual on sedimentology. Laboratory manual on sedimentology. Laboratory, of course, though I did not say, what you do in the field, it included that also. That manuscript also was completed. And what happened to those manuscripts? Well, one thing, when I came back to India, I had to get it typed. Then because from my handwritten manuscript, I had to go for typing. And a good friend of mine, my secretary, who Mr. Gopinathan, A. Gopinathan, who was the secretary during my tenure in the Center for Earth Science Studies, used to live on the opposite side of the north side of Shastamangalam. Occasionally I used to meet Gopinathan, and he was very much interested in figuring out, what I did, how was the stay, etc., in the Soviet Union. And then I told Gopi that I have such a manuscript, and I would wish that to be typed. I know I can myself do it. I have done my own typing for my master's and PhD thesis, for research proposals in the university. So many, I'm not unfamiliar to typing. But Gopi then said, "Sir, give me that manuscript, and I will take maybe 3 or 4 months to get it done. If that is okay with you, why don't you give it to me? Let us go to." Then I said, "If that's fine, Gopi, I will give you the notebook." And Gopi and I walked down to my home in Shastamangalam. And Gopi took, we had, of course, coffee and snacks, etc. in our home, because Gopi probably was visiting my home for the first time. And then Gopi, I gave the manuscript to, the notebook with the manuscript to Gopi Nathan. And, very earnestly, this gentleman completed the typing of the manuscript and returned it to me within 2 months. Well, of course, he was working during his leisure hours in his own office in CES. That apart. But anyway, he has done this wonderful job. I am even today grateful to this man's help. These days he lives somewhere in the neighborhood of Karivattam. I hope he lives comfortably, even though he is in his old age and enjoying the retired life. I hope he is living well. Now, once that manuscript was completed, the question is, what do you do next? When a manuscript it is only a first draft. So the next stage is I had to collate it together, whatever pictures, figures, and tabulations, tables, etc. So these things were to some extent done, at least the tabulations, but they had to be refined. Writing a book is actually not a very simple thing. Whether you are writing about fiction or non-fiction or science, it is a very tough job. I have proved it myself by not doing anything more than what Mr. Gopi did. And that manuscript is still sleeping in my bookcase, along with what is called the notebook, which I purchased in Moscow in one of the bookstores, school bookstores. And that's it. Because, doing a book is actually a complete 200% focused work. And if you look at, again, in the preface of any textbooks, in any science, there will be mention by the author or the authors that they use the time during a sabbatical in order to complete the text. And secondly, they will also make an acknowledgement to the members of the family for not having troubled the author or authors while they were in the process of doing the manuscript. In fact, Indian authored books are in great demand in Africa and in Southeast Asia. Firstly, it has a different point of view. Secondly, the books will be very cheap compared to what the books that are published or originating from the English-speaking world, that is mainly USA. If you took some kind of a count, you will notice that very large number, almost 90% of the textbooks have originated from the United States. Maybe authors could be from Canada, authors could be from what is called English-speaking sector of the European Union or even Britain. Anyway, so that is what happened during my academic work as in the People's Friendship University in Moscow. I'll come up with another story about my tenure in People's Friendship University in Moscow in the next episode. Thank you.